Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Season 3 of the Logical Christian Podcast. I'm your Logical Christian, Dan Irwin. The Logical Christian Podcast is not here to tell you what to think. It's an exercise in how to think. Rather than just accept what we're being told with regard to current events, politics, science, religion, and everything else, we're going to stop the spin, ask questions, dive deep, and look at the world logically. And since logic is a gift from God, most importantly, we're going to look at it all as Christians. Links can be found in the show notes if you'd like to follow along. So with that, let's go be logical Christians. I think we all remember those scary movies where the monster is in the room and someone's in the corner balled up shouting, "Make it go away!" That's how I feel about vegetables. That's how motorheads feel about electric vehicles. That's how my kid feels about me pretty much every time I start to speak. And it sure does appear that's how science feels every time they discover just anything new. On today's episode, first we're going to destroy the planet so we can save the planet. Then we'll play a twisted game of Operation. And finally, we'll be confronted with some hard truths we don't want to deal with. So get outside and enjoy nature before science saves it to death. Then put on that funny gown that opens in the back and hop up on the table. Never you mind the doctor's oversized buzzing tweezers. And finally, close your eyes and plug your ears. If you can't see or hear it, it can't hurt you. And now it may not be away, but here we go. This world is an amazing place. I mean, the universe is an amazing place, but specifically looking at the Earth, the structure, the organization, the usefulness, the predictability, it's simply amazing. I think you'll agree. Oh yeah, you heard me. I think. Well, Guido and I think that you'll find that you have no good options available to you, except to agree, of course. Whether you have any familiarity with it or not, most people recognize the periodic table of elements. This is the big chart with all the elements we know of. A few we're predicting, starting with hydrogen on the top left, helium on the top right, and then on down the chart. Chart is organized by atomic number, which is the number of protons each atom contains. So looking at the chart, we find that hydrogen has 1 proton, helium 2, iron has 26, sodium has 11, gold has 79, and on it goes up to 118 protons. All but 4, if I'm reading the chart correctly, have been found, observed, or created, with those other 4 just being predicted that they exist, but they have not been seen as of yet. And most of these are naturally occurring gases, solids, and a couple liquids, with a number of those with the larger atomic numbers, which are considered synthetic. They were created by smashing 2 different atoms together to create the new element, if only for a fraction of a second. Now, there are 4 at the end of the chart that are predicted to exist, and the only reason those can be predicted to exist is because we live in a creation that was created orderly, organized, and predictable. From evolutionary theory, all naturally occurring elements were created, mostly in the heart of stars, through the fusing of other elements to create the next element. Well, the first 3, hydrogen, helium, and lithium, those were all created in the Big Bang. And if you've been listening for any length of time, you'll know that the Big Bang Theory, not the show, the actual theory, has been under attack by evolutionary scientists for some time now, which makes me wonder what they do with elemental evolution if they discredit the Big Bang. That's not really my problem, though. So after those first 3, the rest, mostly, were created in nuclear fusion, or something like that, inside of stars. Then according to NASA, quote, "These heavy elements are disseminated into the universe by stellar winds and supernova explosions." From a young Earth biblical creation worldview, the one I think I fairly clearly subscribe to, the elements were all created by God. Now, were they all created in the 6 days of creation? I'd say probably. I mean, looking at what it takes to create elements, smashing other elements together in a lab-type setting, I'd say that God probably created all the elements, not counting the synthetics that we have created during the 6 days of creation. Genesis 1, after God finished creation, told man and woman, quote, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that creeps on the earth. Behold, I have given to you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has the fruit of the tree yielding seed. It shall be food for you, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that creeps on the earth which has life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. Now, not stated, but I think fairly accurately implied by subduing the earth is that we are supposed to hold dominion over all of creation. That's animals, that's land, that's sea and air. I think all Christians agree that we are to use the earth, fill it up with people, control the earth, but at the same time, be good stewards of the earth. To the environmentalists on this planet, filling the earth and using the earth is absolutely incompatible with being a good steward of the earth. To the Christian, it can obviously be done because God told us to do it. Now, reading in Genesis 2, starting in verse 10, we learn, quote, Now a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided and became 4 rivers. The name of the first is Pishon. It is the one that went around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. Now the gold of that land is good. The bdellium and the onyx stone are there. Now, we don't know what the bdellium is, or even if I'm saying that correctly, but that's referenced in these verses. Now, today we have bdellium, which is a gum resin extracted from a specific plant. In the book of Genesis, it could be the same thing, or it could be a stone, or it could be anything else, really. Onyx, we assume, is the same as it is today. And now remember, this onyx stone, which sounds as if it was plentiful and easily accessible, according to, the verses in Genesis, well, per science today, it's formed through, quote, the deposition of silica-rich solutions in cavities within rocks. Over time, these solutions slowly evaporate, causing the silica to crystallize and form layers of chalcedony. The banding pattern in onyx is thought to result from changes in the concentration or composition of these silica-rich solutions using the deposition process. This process apparently starts deep in the Earth's crust, takes millions of years, and yet at the same time, God set Adam in the garden and said, hey, the land is rich with onyx. Not millions of years. As for gold, specifically good gold, well, according to ThoughtCo.com, the only place that gold can be made is when stars explode in a supernova or when neutron stars collide. Your choice. That means that all the gold we have on the Earth came from the debris of dead stars. Quote, as the Earth formed, heavy elements, such as iron and gold, sank toward the planet's core. If no other event had occurred, there would be no gold in the Earth's crust. But around 4 billion years ago, Earth was bombarded by asteroid impacts. These impacts stirred the deeper layers of the planet and forced some gold into the mantle and crust. And yet again, the gold in the land that Adam was placed in was good, and apparently it wasn't deep at all. In fact, the implication that I take from that verse is that it was just kind of laying there. Now, in Genesis 4, we have a brief genealogy of Cain. We find in verse 22 that Tubal-Cain, who came along about 700 years after creation, was a forger of all implements of bronze and iron. Some translations say brass rather than bronze. Either way, these are both alloys, meaning neither brass nor bronze is naturally occurring like gold or iron. Brass is an alloy of zinc and copper. Bronze is an alloy of tin and copper. So within 700 years, we went from creation to actually mixing elements to create new metal compounds. So how are zinc and copper and tin supposedly formed? No idea. I'll let you look that up. That's really kind of enough chemistry for now. I know that you'll agree with that. Now, permit me to take a little rabbit trail for a moment. Yeah, we weren't on a rabbit trail before. Let's go on one now. Dmitri Mendeleev was a Native American, and no, That's a lie. Dmitri was a Russian chemist. That should be obvious by Dmitri Mendeleev. He was a Russian chemist and inventor who lived from 1834 to 1907. He was raised as an Orthodox Christian, and his mother told him to, quote, patiently search divine and scientific truth. Not bad advice. At some point later in life, per his son, he had departed from the Orthodox faith and instead pursued some form of, quote, romanticized deism. And no, I have no idea what that means. Dmitri is best known as the inventor of the periodic table, formulating the periodic law, which helped him to correct certain properties of specific elements, as well as predict the existence of 3 elements that hadn't been discovered yet, but were discovered later and were discovered to be almost identical to what he predicted. Now, apparently in 1869, at the age of 35, he had a dream where, quote, I saw in a dream a table where all elements fell into place as required. Awakening, I immediately wrote it down on a piece of paper. Only in one place did a correction later seem necessary. Now, at the time, there were 65 elements that had been discovered, and he organized his table by atomic mass rather than atomic number. But this is where our periodic table originated. Kind of interesting, right? Well, since creation, or you could even say since the evolution of man, is really your starting point doesn't much matter for the following comment, we have discovered a number of things, elements that have been used individually or combined in some way to do all sorts of things. We use metals and gases for all sorts of things. We use radioactive elements for medicine, power, and destruction. We use primarily carbon, the 6th element, based energy sources like coal and oil to power most of our country, most of our machines, and most of everything. Now, we have learned so much through actual real science, some good, some not as good, and some very bad, we don't know what the limit is anymore. Most of us would agree that the mining, extracting, purifying, mixing and combining, reacting, and all other forms of manufacturing of these elements has been very positive for all of mankind. Now, yes, there have been accidents. We've discovered that some elements aren't as safe as we first thought they were. Some manufacturing processes result in dangerous or deadly products, either instantaneously or over a period of time. But overall, steel, concrete, carbon fiber, plastics, glass, fabrics, hygienic products, and the list is almost infinite, have all come out of figuring out how the elements we've been given, and I would say given by God, can be used for the good of man, so as to subdue the earth and fill it up. Even the greenest of environmentalists seem to enjoy the luxuries of modern manufacturing, utilizing the elements the earth has given us. But now, although most people would agree that the discovery, extraction, manufacturing, and utilization of Earth's elements has overall been positive, we're in a new era where the environmentalist crowd wants us to stop extracting and using certain things, rather extract and use, other things. While the rest of us would argue that we should maybe just stay the course in what we're doing and what we're using, and that we're in no way ready to use other elements effectively anytime in the near future. As we're being pushed to go all electric everything, which includes battery-powered all sorts of things, you've no doubt seen pictures of the massive lithium mines that are just dug out, scalped out of the earth in order to make our batteries. When you compare lithium mines to, say, coal mines or sites where they do oil extraction or fracking, the lithium mines are clearly much uglier. They look much less environmentally friendly, although we're told that they're much better, in the end. Solar panels use all sorts of elements and minerals and suck up a massive amount of land and green space and cause superheated reflections of the sun, in some cases, which literally cook the birds mid-flight. Speaking of birds, the windmills that were dotting just everywhere with incredibly fast blade tip speeds, those like to kill birds as they come around and just gently smash the birds to bits. Not to mention the fact that some scientists argue that windmills will or are screwing up naturally occurring air currents on the planet, which will have a definite impact on the Earth's climate. Of course. And although we've dammed various rivers and waterfalls in the past, and we use large turbine generators to make hydroelectric power, that effect doesn't seem to be anything most people were or even are worried about. The latest innovations, however, using things like ocean tidal motion or wave motion, those seem to have the environmentalists, well, let's just say concerned that we're screwing up now the water currents, which will have a negative effect on the marine environment and marine life and, of course, the climate. But as we were told by W. Bush when he said we needed to abandon the free market in order to save the free market, well, we're being expected to believe that we need to break a few environmental eggs. Just kind of ignore the environmental impact in order to save the environment. Now, is that true? I would argue probably not. In fact, what we've been finding over and over and over and also over is that those who have this mindset, which is a very leftist, woke mindset, are put simply wrong. Wrong nearly every time, and they're making things worse as they claim that they're making things better. Now, I think at this point, I could take, let me just make this claim, any and every woke idea and show factually how it's wrong and bad and stupid. So an article came out recently, like within the last month, where after about 11 years of research, we find ourselves in one of these environmentalist conundrums yet again. See, at the bottom of the ocean, at least in some locations, we find some highly sought-after metals like cobalt, nickel, and that sweet, sweet lithium. In fact, in the region in question, the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, located in the Pacific Ocean, in a narrow strip, at least narrow north-south, stretching between Mexico and Hawaii, we have the following countries doing research to see what usable metals and minerals they may be able to scrape off the sea floor. These include the Cook Islands, Japan, China, Germany, France, Slovakia, Singapore, Tonga, UK, Russia, South Korea, Kiribati, no idea, Belgium, and Nauru. But found on Ecoticius, ECOTICIAS.com. You tell me. Headline, Dark Oxygen Discovered for the First Time in History. It's under the sea. And it's not good at all. Also, found on CNN.com, headline, Scientists discover dark oxygen being produced more than 13,000 feet below the ocean surface. So the gist. Back in 2013, ocean scientist man Andrew Sweetman was doing some studies in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, and his magical sensors were telling him that they were picking up oxygen at a depth of 4,000 meters, which CNN apparently does the conversion. No way for us to know if this is accurate. 13,000 feet. Now, that isn't possible, according to conventional thought, because sunlight doesn't penetrate that deep into the ocean, so photosynthesis can't possibly be occurring. Now, he was fairly confident that his sensors were faulty, so he sent them back to the manufacturer for investigation and repair and recalibration, or replacement entirely if they're completely broken. The manufacturer came back with a report that said the sensors were perfectly fine. Well, he tried them again, got the same result, so he sent them back again, because the data simply wasn't possible. And again, the sensors were working perfectly. So now, Sweetman, the professor at the Scottish Association for Marine Science, decided that maybe they're actually finding evidence of oxygen being produced without the use of sunlight. How is this possible, you may ask? Well, I said you may ask. Go on. Fine, whatever. Well, Sweetman asked that question. Turns out these metallic nodules that are down at the bottom of the ocean, lying in salt water, kind of work like batteries. I mean, who knew, right? You get a flow of electrons between the nodules using the minerals in the water to transport those electrons, setting up a bunch of little batteries, each with the power of about a AA battery. These electrical charges cause the water, made up of compounds of 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. It causes them to combine and then split, causing 2 hydrogen molecules, that's 2 H2s, and 1 oxygen molecule, or 1 O2. And this is a process that's been known about and done in the lab for about 250 years now. In fact, this is actually a process that can be used and is being investigated for use on a large scale to manufacture hydrogen from water, carbon-free development of hydrogen, which can then be used in things like hydrogen-powered engines, which then uses the hydrogen, combines it with oxygen, again, it combusts, and then it has only water vapor as its emissions. You know, the circle of life. Yes, this little magical process is called electrolysis. Anyway, the oxygen is split off and used deep in the ocean, while the hydrogen, goes to the, it's absorbed by the, hey, what's that over there? I guess it was nothing. Never mind. Oh, boy, eyes are playing tricks on me. Anyway, where were we? Oh, right. Okay, bottom of the ocean. So now the conundrum. See, all these countries and nations that I just rattled off a few moments ago, well, they sure would like all of these little metal bits off the ocean floor, because these little bits of lithium, cobalt, and nickel can be used to make things like, well, you'd never guess, but batteries and other stuff in order to green the planet through the the theory of electrifying literally everything, thus saving the planet from the evils of fossil fuels and their vile environment, animal man, and earth-killing emissions. Not plants. Plants can't get enough of those tasty emissions. They can just shut up. They don't get a vote. Plants don't matter. I mean, they matter, but they don't matter for this. Anyway. So why would it be a big deal if various nations scoop up the metals? Well, sir, or ma'am, or I guess other, this mining presents dangers to deep ocean environments which rely on these nodules' oxygen. Or at least they think maybe that's the case. Quote, Sweet Man highlights that the mining sector needs to think about the effect on dark oxygen generation along with the wider ecology. Prior mining efforts in the 1980s triggered substantial damage to marine life, with salvage taking years. Hence, scientific oversight, together with additional investigation into this occurrence, are necessary before any massive removal happens. In fact, more than 800 marine scientists across 44 entire nations have signed petitions calling for the suspension of deep ocean mining because, who knows, right? I mean, this could be bad, or maybe not, but probably is. The bottom line, this previously unknown dark oxygen may really complicate deep sea mining because we have no idea what the removal of the minerals would mean to the oxygen production, what the potential decrease in oxygen production deep in the ocean would mean to the marine ecosystem, also deep in the ocean, and what the possible destruction of deep sea ecosystems could mean to the overall health of the planet. So in all honesty, I don't know how to feel about this. I'm literally pulled in opposite directions on this one. Let me explain. In one direction, the Earth is there to be used. God is sovereign, which means that the discovery of these seafloor minerals was foreordained before creation, before the flood churned up and settled the seafloor with the mineral bits oriented, the way they are. If we want to mine those minerals, do it. Mine those little suckers. There are always scientists or environmental wackadoodles who don't want us to, even set foot on the Earth, as they feel by the very presence of humanity, the Earth is being irreparably harmed. They scream at the sky about the extinction of some useless little fish or something, claiming that even one change of that nature, an extinction, could destroy the entire planet. The butterfly effect or the little fishy effect or something like that. Except that regardless of your theological worldview, all sorts of things have gone extinct without the planet falling apart. Ecosystems have been allegedly utterly destroyed and decimated without the planet splitting into tiny bits, and then those completely destroyed ecosystems somehow, miraculously, seem to bounce back and adapt and then thrive, when we clearly told them that they weren't able to do so. They don't listen to us at all. So on one hand, I say, get your biggest shovel and go get those metals. Now, pulling me in the other direction is the stupidity of man, willing to absolutely destroy the planet to mine the minerals manufacture the devices, construct the huge farms, dispose of the hazardous waste, and landfill the obsolete devices in order to save the planet. We have been given, I would say, a miracle power source, and it sure does appear to be unlimited. Now, whether oil is strictly from plant and animal matter, primarily buried during the flood, or if it's a constantly reproducing, renewable, oozing goo that keeps forming deep in the earth, it seems like this carbon-based goop and all of the many, many byproducts we've discovered or manufactured from this stuff thus far, well, it sure does come in handy for, literally everything. So why are we destroying the planet to do something we can already do in a dumber, less productive, less reliable, less efficient, less usable way, rather than just responsibly utilizing the readily available resources in a very planet-friendly way developed over many years that works reliably and efficiently in a manner that advanced the industrialized world to the place it is today and could do the same for those nations which are still working through that process. You know, lobster is nothing but a sea spider. A spider with a hard shell that takes pliers and hammers to get just a tiny bit of meat from. If I have to go to the garage to get a little bit of meat, it's not worth it. And if this thing dies before you cook it, well, don't use it because it can be very dangerous. Mushrooms, those are nothing but poo fungus. Some of them are safe to eat, some are psychedelic to eat, some are deadly to eat. Pufferfish, they blow up with all sorts of spiny things telling you to stay away for your own safety. And if you catch them and kill them and prepare them in any way other than the one very particular safe way, you'll die. And humans, boldly ignoring the warning signs of all of those and so many more things, decide, nah, I know better. Now, God may have made these things with built-in, quite obvious warning signs and deterrents to stop us from doing stupid things. We, however, boldly cross over the stupid line and figure we obviously know better. Hold my beer, y'all watch this. Now, this is where I feel we are with the idea of saving the planet. We are so heck bent, because I'm a Baptist, on stopping one single solitary form of what we're calling pollution, but what plants, literally all plants, all over the green globe call the breath of life, that we're doing nothing but stupid things, possibly the stupidest of all things, which is at the very least damaging the planet, potentially severely damaging the planet, in order to save the planet from what we're allegedly doing by what we're definitely doing. Now that's why I kind of have to lean toward, hey, scientists, leave them rocks alone. I wonder how many got that reference. This is where I fall back to the knowledge of the absolute sovereignty of God, yet the free and rebellious will of man. Everything that happens is both foreordained by God and the result of the choices of man. None of these things either worry God or thwart his plan, because although we choose to do seemingly stupid things like this, blatantly ignoring the readily available resources God has made blatantly obvious in both availability and usability, will all things work together for the good of God's elect and for his glory. And we've seen time and time again that God designed this planet to deal with our idiocy. We made the air unbreathable. We learned our lesson, controlled air pollution at least to a greater degree, and the air cleaned itself up, or it can, in short order. We set rivers on fire by massively polluting them. And then we stopped dumping literally all waste streams into the rivers. The fires went out, and the rivers cleaned themselves up in short order. We've had some large oil spills in the oceans with some temporarily destructive consequences. We were told that it would take centuries, maybe millennia, for the ecosystems to revive and thrive again. And in short order, we discovered that there are all sorts of little microscopic bugs and organisms that just love to clean that stuff up. We discovered how to manufacture plastic. We use it now for everything and everywhere. And now we say we're wrong for using it because it'll take millions of years for it to break down in landfills. That plastic is destroying the planet. And then we find there are all sorts of little microbes that just love eating plastic and pooping out more eco-friendly droppings in, short order. But in the meantime, we decide to recycle plastic. which is a complete waste of time and money, or so the studies are revealing, which starts with the grinding of plastics into a coarse powder, and then we wonder why we have microplastic particulate everywhere, in everything, including all the organs of all of our bodies. I'm absolutely convinced that our microplastics problem is primarily a byproduct of our recycling efforts, and I can all but guarantee that if we just cold turkey stopped recycling plastic, you guessed it, in short order, we'd see a massive step change drop in the prevalence of microplastics across everything and everyone. And as sure as I am of all of that, I'm just as sure that we will start mining the ocean floor for these precious, priceless battery and electronic making metals and minerals, because we must save the planet. And in the process, we'll absolutely devastate these deep sea ecosystems, all the while screaming about us destroying the planet until we realize that this push to electrify everything is, once again, a stupid idea, and people as a global whole will push back and shun the stupidity, at which point the deep sea mining will cease, and the ecosystems will, say it with me, in short order, repair and rebuild and then thrive again. Why we make life harder than it has to be is a mystery that neither you nor I will ever solve. Quite the contrary, we're actually going to contribute to that mystery, if only in our own personal lives. Trust me, I know so much. God has laid out a planet, a sustainable, reproducing, healing, reliable system for us to live, work, play, and thrive in. Likewise, he's laid out some pretty basic commandments for us to follow. Commandments that, if followed even just most of the time, our lives would be easier, better, more joyful. But just as we seem to make life extremely externally hard by ignoring the obvious and doing all the things that just scream out, stop, don't do this, there's a better way, I make my personal life infinitely harder by also ignoring the blatantly smack me upside the head obvious rules and principles of life to live by pretty much all of the time. So how do we stop this trend of foolishness? Well, in the world as a whole, who knows? We need the right people, clear-headed thinkers to be in positions of power, and I'll be honest, I don't hold out a whole lot of hope for that. Personally, that's the process of sanctification, right? If we want to personally fix the problem. This is the process of becoming more like Jesus day by day, not in a straight line, of course, in a jagged, disjointed, high peaks and low valleys kind of line, but a generally upward progressing line. Through reading, prayer, attendance at church, and participation at a rock-solid church, filling our minds with what's right and good and pure and lovely, and you know the thing, and taking captive, casting out the thoughts and imaginations we shouldn't linger on. And this is how we slowly but surely stop making the stupid, sinful choices that make life harder. I'm currently working through the book of Proverbs, and the number of ways we're told that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, that the righteous are wise. In the Psalms, we hear that meditating on God's word, on his laws, makes us prudent and wise. We have all we need to make a difficult life and a difficult existence at least marginally easier, or better, or more joyful, as we strive to be more like Christ every day. So, I guess I'll end this segment on a question that we can all ponder. Why is it the clear, obvious, easy things seem to be the hardest for us to choose to do? We're kind of an arrogant bunch, aren't we? Humans, I mean. We really think we have it all figured out, and then we figure out that we don't, but then we know for sure that we have it all figured out now until we discover that we don't again. And this is what we call science. At least, this is what we call science today, and it's kind of science-y. The book of Proverbs warns us many times about arrogance. In Proverbs 8, Lady Wisdom is speaking, quote, "The fear of Yahweh is to hate evil, pride and arrogance and the evil way and the mouth of perverted words I hate." Pride, arrogance, evil, perverted speech, all grouped together as being hated by wisdom. As we move through the Proverbs, we find that arrogance is followed by disgrace. Arrogance causes fights. Arrogance causes strife. And in Proverbs 29, we read, quote, "He who pampers his slave from childhood will in the end find him to be arrogant." Looking at some other translations, it appears that the general meaning of this verse is essentially that one who is coddled their whole life is one who grows to develop a sense of entitlement. Can I just say that, that pretty much absolutely describes science today? And let me define that really quickly. When I talk about science in these kinds of negative terms, this is spoken with a capital S and the little scare quotes around the word. It's not science like we did in high school or college, mixing things and collecting data, analyzing results, testing, etc. It's not like what we think of where we come up with an idea and then figure out how to test the idea and then find where we're wrong, modify our hypothesis, and go around the horn again. This is a religion. This is a belief system, a faith that has been created and is adhered to almost regardless of evidence to the contrary. And more than a religion, this is almost a death cult. You do not contradict the belief, to be sure, but if you dare try to even leave the belief system, well, you'll be utterly destroyed. Now, this system, this capital S science, is something that has been decided and declared true. And not only are the so-called scientists inside the belief system wholly devoted to the belief, so are the politicians and the teachers, celebrities, and the media. This belief system is in the textbooks in both primary and secondary school. It's in our movies and TV shows and documentaries. It's in the commercials. It's in fiction and nonfiction books. It's in children's books, magazines, museums. It's literally everywhere. The vast majority of the world adheres to this belief system, either entirely or in large part, many without even realizing they're worshiping at the altar of capital S science. They've been trained, dare I say, brainwashed to believe this science. The only adversary to this belief system is, at least it appears to be, religion, and not all religions, only some religions, and not even all the adherents to those religions believe that they should stand in opposition to capital S science. We've spoken about this belief system many times in the past. There are a few core beliefs that come up over and over again, those being things like man-caused climate change and the theory of evolution. Attempting to become the next core belief added to those two is that belief dealing with the LGBTQIA2+ community, especially and specifically, at least right now, the T part of that. Now, thankfully, that appears to be failing in its attempt to gain core belief status, but only time will tell which way that'll go. In man's arrogant, religious, pseudo-scientific belief system, and knowing that evolution is true and that man is still allegedly changing and growing and evolving, capital S science has determined that there are a number of bits and pieces in and on our bodies that we just don't need anymore. These are generally called vestigial, which basically just means leftover or lingering or residual. These are parts and pieces that science has declared we used to use or used to need back in a prior evolutionary form of human, and they're just now kind of hanging around. They're things we don't need anymore, and evolution will eventually get rid of. It's just a matter of time, right? If you Google or DuckDuckGo, or maybe Ask Jeeves, or perform a Lycos search, or look up in your glorious leather-bound encyclopedia set, or do whatever your generation does, you'll find list upon list of body parts or organs that are just simply no longer needed, both for man and for animals. Now, I've worked in the chemical industry for many years now, multiple manufacturing plants, and you've all seen refining plants or chemical plants. They usually have a number of tanks sitting there, maybe some big stacks, a large flare derrick burning off residual vapors, a bunch of piping. Most of them have some sort of steel structure of multiple levels, and if you pass by at night, you'll see all sorts of lighting all over inside of them. And to be honest, they're really pretty at night. Well, most of these plants, if they have any age on them at all, through changes in the process, maybe changes in the chemical being produced, well, they have a few tanks that are still in place that aren't being used and never will be again, or they have steel structures or office-type buildings that are no longer going to be used, runs of piping or electrical conduit that don't do anything anymore, and all of that stuff needs to go. It needs to be demolished and removed and disposed of in order to clean up the plant and just get rid of the useless, or shall I say vestigial, stuff. Well, that's kind of what these scientists have declared is going on with our bodies. See, in these various companies, demolition of obsolete stuff is a matter of time and money, and little by little, the unneeded stuff is removed from the system and disposed of. Well, with our bodies, it's not so much money, it's just a matter of time, or so we're told, as little by little, over millions of years, the human, or maybe animal bodies will evolve these useless parts out of the mix. But until they're gone, we're left to deal with these hangers-on, and, well, sometimes they can give us problems. Now, as an engineer, again, although you'd never know it when looking at cars these days, the best design is generally supposed to be the simplest design. The more stuff you add to a design, the more things that can go wrong. This is why, look, although I love the amenities in new cars, I really do. Things like power tailgates on trucks, or tailgates that open 37 different ways. Do we need this? Luxury cars with extending seatbelts or hideaway steering wheels. Yes, those are real. These are just ridiculous because when they break, and they will, wow, will they be expensive to fix. Think about the taillights of cars these days, just simple taillights. They are the coolest things. I love some of the taillights out there. You know, they have the progressive chasing lights to signal a turn, or they have LEDs that are white until they need to be red, or maybe orange, just depending on what you want them to do. But you know what I can do with my older truck if a taillight fails? I can change a bulb for a couple of bucks. Or if the entire taillight pod breaks, gets hit by something, I can change that whole pod for less than $50. Now, if your fancy taillight either breaks or fails with all its nifty lighting, well, you're going to be in for a minimum of a couple $100 to buy the new pod, and I'm probably estimating low because there's no changing bulbs anymore. When that driver's display fails, might as well get out the loan documentation so you can afford to replace it. But they're absolutely cool. I'm not arguing that until they're not. Well, our bodies, theoretically, they're kind of the same. The more bits and pieces you have, the more things can go wrong and cause you problems. I mean, think about it. Have you ever had a paper cut on a finger? It's just the worst, right? I mean, some of you just had, by the mere mention, just had a full body shiver thinking about the last time the edge of that innocent-looking piece of paper sliced deeply through your finger. And you exclaimed, you know how to never get a paper cut on your finger again? It's a very simple solution. Remove your fingers. No fingers? No paper cuts on your fingers, right? I'll bet you could guess my solution to never breaking a leg again. And although millions of people live perfectly good, productive, happy lives while missing fingers and limbs or the use of limbs, most of us would generally prefer and agree that it would be better to have all our fingers or both of our legs if that's possible. But what we don't want are things that will cause us problems if we don't need them anymore, right? So think of the vestigial wisdom teeth. This is actually, I think, probably the only one that I kind of agree with capital S science on. Now, the theory says that we used to have larger mouths, larger, stronger jaws, and those teeth used to come in just fine and do their job. They'd fit perfectly. They were very useful. Today, with smaller, narrower jaws, pretty much all wisdom teeth are good for is allowing the parents the opportunity to make funny videos of their kids. I only have one wisdom tooth myself. It's laying down sideways in my bottom jaw and aimed like a bullet toward the roots of my back tooth. I had one dentist, it's probably been 20 years ago now, tell me that he wanted to schedule me to get it extracted. I didn't want to do that, so I asked him that since I went in every 6 months for a cleaning, like a good boy, would we notice movement before it smashed against my other tooth or created an abscess or something like that? He said, yeah, we'd likely see motion before it caused a problem, so I told him that if it wasn't bothering me, I wasn't going to bother it. And it's still in there. It's happy. I'm happy. All is right with the world. If the world consisted of only my lower jaw and the one wisdom tooth. So I totally agree with science, capital S, that we used to be bigger, and I'd argue probably much bigger. Evolutionary science, though, has to play with that theory because, remember, we evolved from some sort of chimp, not an ape, some sort of chimp, meaning we were smaller and we've been getting bigger. So they try to counter the smallness because they need the bigger jaw by giving us bigger foreheads and big jutting jaws and things like that. Think of the Neanderthal, right? Well, that's kind of a stupid theory, kind of stupid, unprovable, capital S science, faith-based belief built on assumptions, deceptions, forgeries, and lies. I think it makes more sense to say that we used to be bigger humans, and over time, we've been shrinking, and now those teeth no longer fit correctly. Looking at some of the other parts and pieces that so-called science says we have, or some of us have, or most of us have, and we simply just don't need anymore, we find things like male nipples. Yeah, we don't need those suckers at all, and to be honest, they don't really do much except, for just telling others that we're cold. So why do we have them? I have no idea. Unless you're some severely mentally and spiritually sick degenerate, they don't lactate. And yeah, if you haven't kept up with the news, men who are pretending to be women, wanting to chest feed babies like women breastfeed babies. And this, it just makes me sick. They're pumping themselves full of chemicals to make their nipples secrete something for babies to go ahead and latch on and drink. And those people, the so-called scientists, the so-called doctors, the sick, perverted men, they should be in prison, at best, in my humble opinion. But why do normal men have nipples? I don't know. To be vestigial, though, it would mean that they used to have a purpose and now they don't. And yeah, I don't think any scientist has ever claimed that they have or had a purpose. In fact, humans and animals, males and females, all have nipples, and males have no use for them. Seems like a design feature. But whatever they aren't vestigial because they were never used for anything specific that they aren't used for still anymore. Again. The palmaris longus muscle. This is a muscle that goes from the elbow to the wrist, more or less. If you rest the back of your wrist on a table, touch your thumb to your pinky, if a band of muscle kind of pops up at the underside of the wrist, that's the palmaris longus. I think I've got it. It's not prominent, but I think I got something that pops up there in my wrists. Apparently about 10% of humans don't have it. Hashtag evolution. No, I jest. But capital S science theorizes that maybe it helped our monkey-like ancestors climb trees. They also guess that maybe it might have helped early humans with grip, but we don't need that grip anymore, so hashtag evolution. But evolution isn't generally thought of as losing information, especially useful information. Just because we don't generally need the same grip strength as we used to, theoretically, that doesn't mean that evolution just yeets that muscle out of existence. I'd argue that the 10% of humans that don't have it because of a glitch in the DNA that's kind of filtered into the population. And if two people with the same glitch make a kid, there's a good chance their kid will have that same glitch. That doesn't make it vestigial. It makes it a mutation, a developmental defect in a small percentage of humans. Now, in a lot of cases, people don't need a variety of muscles that they have, or as large a muscles as they have. That doesn't mean that they're going to disappear, though. Another few muscles, the pyramidalis muscles, which are down around the joint between the two pubic bones, and I have no idea what I'm talking about there. Those are missing in, again, maybe about 10 to 20% of people. Apparently, we don't need them, but that doesn't make them vestigial. They do actually help contract some other abdominal muscles, etc., etc. They're not required in order for us to do that, but that's what they do. They serve a purpose, but you can live without them. Again, you can live without a lot of parts. That doesn't prove those parts are vestigial. How about the Darwin's point, which is a little tiny bump that some people have on the rim of the outer ear? It looks like I might have a very small one. Don't really know, nor do I care. The theory by capital S scientists is that it used to be a joint that would allow us to fold the top of the ear down to cover and protect the ear canal. Now, picture that with me for just a moment. folding your ear over your ear canal. That's fantastic. Could someone tell me how that's not needed anymore? Are you susceptible to swimmer's ear? What if you could just protect your ears from getting water in there by folding your ear? Or do you have to wear earplugs at work like I do because of noise? Foldable ears! Those would be great. But because we don't have foldable ears anymore, and a percentage of people have a slight bump on the rim of their ear, boom, vestigial ear flap joint. Speaking of ears, we have auricular muscles that make the ears move. For most everyone, those muscles are actually still there, but they don't pivot our ears like animals pivot ears to hear things, at least anymore. And some people, the worst of us, can't even twitch their ears. So, see, vestigial. And it's a matter of time before evolution takes care of that little problem as well. Now, how about the tailbone? Did you know you didn't need that? Yeah. Well, sort of. See, over millions of years, it no longer has a purpose, or at least not its original purpose. We used to have a tail. I think that's pretty obvious. And now, that tailbone, well, all it does is, act as an anchor point for a number of different muscles, almost like it was designed to do that. But clearly it wasn't. It was a tail. Vestigial. The appendix. The little pointless dangly thing off your intestines. Darwin, not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination, by the way, but a capital S scientist, suggested that it was probably vestigial. See, it used to help us digest certain things, but we don't have to do that anymore. We don't eat those things. We have processed food now. Some people are born without it. It can go bad and has to be removed from a number of people. I almost had to have mine removed, but due to something else, it wasn't the appendix itself, but that little sucker is still hanging in there for me. So, although it's been considered vestigial and no longer needed for a long time now, in recent years, lowercase s, real science, has magically discovered that, oops, maybe we do need it. Or more accurately, maybe it actually still has a purpose. And again, although we can live without it, that doesn't mean it's vestigial. So what they think it does, or what it's supposed to do now, is hold helpful gut bacteria and possibly generate immune cells that fight off disease. So for 120 years, when the appendix is acting up, the solution was given to us by capital S science. It's not needed. It's vestigial. Just chop it out. But not even 10 years ago, if the appendicitis isn't acute enough to the point that it could maybe burst or something like that, since lowercase s science finally figured out, that it still serves a purpose, now the recommendation has shifted to try to cure it with antibiotics and not remove it. That's what they did with me. A massive number of antibiotics all at the same time to battle back a pretty bad infection that I had going on, and my appendix healed as part of that, and I've never had a problem either before or since. And now we find ourselves in another instance of lowercase s science doing the work they should have been doing to combat capital S science. Found on ScienceAlert.com, headline, "A useless organ that doctors often remove could actually fight cancer." Now, when I mention that headline, my guess is that your first thought was, well, you couldn't be talking about the thymus gland. And oh yeah, I literally am talking about the thymus gland. Now, I know I'm preaching to the anatomically knowledgeable choir here. Just humor me, will you? The thymus is a little fella that's in the upper front part of the chest behind the sternum. As kids, this thing apparently does a lot of T-cell production. As a matter of fact, T-cells are named for the thymus. Thymus. It helps kids develop a fully functioning immune system. As we get older, apparently this thing kind of shrivels up and doesn't really do anything anymore, or so that was thought for about 150 years. Turns out, this thing still actually performs some fairly important functions, like T-cell production and harmful T-cell elimination. The thymus can develop cysts, but those are generally not problematic. There are a few thymus-specific reasons why it might need to be removed, but generally it's removed if you're doing heart surgery because, well, it's kind of in the way. And since you don't need it, yoink, on the organ pile it goes. It's been known that if the thymus is removed in infancy, it's generally fatal, since the baby will not develop an immune response. The older the child, the more developed the immune system, so the more likely it is that the child could have the thymus removed and be mostly fine, or again, that's what they had thought. But per a study done recently of over 7,000 cardiothoracic surgery patients, 6,000 who did not have their thymus removed, 1,146 who did, they found that those who had it removed were twice as likely to die within 5 years, even when adjusting for all sorts of other factors. Additionally, those who had it removed were twice as likely to develop some form of aggressive cancer within 5 years and had a higher recurrence rate of their cancer after treatment. Now, although the data doesn't directly determine the cause for this obvious difference, they did find that those who underwent a thymectomy had fewer T-cell receptors in their blood, which very basically is crucial to responding to infections. Bottom line, because science, the real stuff, actually did science rather than simply genuflecting as they reverently backed out of the church of capital S science, they discovered that yet again, those parts that they so desperately want to call remnants of our evolutionary ancestors are actually important parts and pieces, designated specific jobs to do. Again, just because you can remove something doesn't mean you don't need it. The Bible, specifically David, is more correct than we probably really understand, even with as much medical knowledge as we think we have today, when he says that we are fearfully and wonderfully made in Psalm 139. He says this, quote, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body." See, every strand of DNA, every cell, every organ, every muscle, appendage, ligament, and all other anatomy-ish sounding words were fearfully and wonderfully made and knitted into your body while you were being formed. Now from here, I could go down the pro-life, anti-abortion, or more accurately, the anti-murder path, but hopefully you already understand that as soon as, the little swimmer gets into the egg, a brand new, unique strand of DNA is formed, unique from anyone else past, present, or future, which means when those who cry and scream at the sky that nobody can tell them what to do with their bodies, sure, they're mostly right. We can't. And at least with regard to this specific topic, we don't want to. We just want you to not murder the other unique human body that isn't in any way, shape, or form your body that you're desperately wanting to kill. Now, I could also go a different direction and finish that last verse that we were just discussing, verse 16, which is one of those parts that's generally kind of glossed over. See, it says, quote, "Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." Now, at best, your general evangelical churches will say that our days are numbered and we were born at the exact time we were supposed to be and we'll die at the exact time we're supposed to, etc., etc. And that is correct. It's not wrong. Some may try to claim that this means that God looked down through the tunnel of time and, see what would happen in our lives, the choices that we would make, etc., etc. And then he came back and he wrote them all down. No, that's silly. There's nothing in the Bible that says that at all. And neither of these actually fit what was actually said here. So the word translated as ordained in the Hebrew is yatzer. Now this word is also translated as form or potter or fashion, frame, purposed. In other words, the days in their exactness were written down before you were ever formed. People don't like that idea. But trust me, God didn't just write the numbers of the days of your life in his book. The days, the events, your actions and reactions, all things were ordained before you were ever formed. Now, in God's sovereignty, in a paradox that we're not going to understand, is our free will to do as we choose per the inclination of our hearts. How all that works, well, as with so many other things, I again have no idea. So I could go down that precarious path of God's sovereignty, much to the displeasure of at least some of you. But I'm not going to wander down either one of those paths. No, I'm going to walk down a much more rage-inducing path, one that should make any clear-thinking human, any logical, non-mentally ill, any Christian human desire extreme, immediate, exacting justice. Found on the Daily Caller via MSN.com, headline, U.S. hospitals raked in $120 million performing sex changes on thousands of kids, new data shows. So why would I go to this article? Well, because real science needs to shut down this woke, child-hating, satanic cult, capital S science, immediately. This article is about as simple as it gets. Over 5 years, from 2019 through 2023, according to a newly compiled database, 5,747 minors, which is all the way up to 17 and a half years old, underwent sex change surgeries, and 8,579 were given puberty blockers or opposite sex hormones. This database was compiled by medical watchdog Do No Harm. The story and the database are both linked in the notes if you're curious, and you should be. In the database, you can choose your state. You see not only how many minors are considered sex change patients, but also how many surgeries, how many hormones, how many prescriptions were written, and how much the hospitals have submitted in charges. And if you want a little more info, you can scroll down and find out which hospitals are committing this evil. Let me give you a couple examples. West Virginia hits close to home because, it's close to home. 45 total patients, 4 surgeries, with the balance being hormones and puberty blockers, 260 prescriptions, total of $43,165 submitted to insurance companies. It appears that 12 hospitals have participated in this stuff across the state, with the J.W. Ruby Memorial Hospital in Morgantown, that's where the college WVU resides, being the hospital who thinks it's okay to mutilate the children through surgery. They had 14 of the 45 patients, and they've done all 4 of the surgeries. And surprisingly, they've only submitted $1,624 to insurance, which kind of suggests to me that they're doing this for the fun of it, maybe? Because they specifically hate children, possibly? I don't know, because they're tools of Satan? Absolutely? You make the call. How about the only other state in the union to go completely red across everything in the last election, just like West Virginia did? Oklahoma. 64 patients, 18 surgeries, $59,132 submitted, 16 total hospitals involved or organizations, with the Northwest Center for Behavioral Health, which appears to be an organization that partners maybe with other hospitals, performing 9 of the surgeries, 1 each in 3 other hospitals, and then 6 are not accounted for in this database. California, because why not, 2,065 patients, 1,359 of those being surgeries for nearly $29 million. Florida has 272 patients, 105 surgeries, nearly $2 million. Wisconsin, let's go to the Midwest. Wisconsin, 195 patients, 104 of those being surgeries for just over $1.1 million. And Minnesota, where that closeted gay, almost definitely a pedo governor who came way too close to being our next vice president, that's where he resides and governs, 382 patients, 174 surgeries, $2.3 million. You get the idea. You can check it all out from there if you'd like. The Do No Harm group did compile the worst of the worst hospitals, with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia being the worst. Ironically, the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia doing these surgeries, their initials are CHOP. Connecticut Children's Medical Center is the next worst, followed by Children's Minnesota, Seattle Children's, and Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, which rounds out the worst of the worst. These hospitals, all of the hospitals involved, should be shut down immediately and turned over to administrators, doctors, nurses, techs, maintenance personnel, and janitorial personnel, and anyone else who actually care about humans. And every single individual associated with these hospitals who had anything to do with any more than 0 of these procedures, shall we call it, well, they should be fired. And in my opinion, they should be arrested. They should be tried and convicted of child abuse and child mutilation, and anything else that we can throw at them. And then every single one of them, one at a time, so they can watch and anticipate their turn. Each of them should be hanged from a tall gallows by a short rope, live streamed for all around the nation and the world to watch, so that the rest of the country and the world knows that we will never do this evil again in this nation, that the choice to participate in absolute satanic evil will not be tolerated. Now, am I wrong for wanting this? Maybe. But this is the destruction of image bearers of God, of literal children. I think I'm kind of justified in just a bit of righteous anger, right? Now, will I get my wish? Sadly, I doubt it. But at the very least, real science must stand up and declare this cult, this capital S science, this satanic pseudo-religion masking itself as legitimate science, to be the unscientific evil death cult that it is. Now, look, I love science. I really do. God gave us science. Without God, without creation as described in the Bible, we would never be able to do actual science because nothing would be stable or predictable. The laws, the actions and reactions, it would all be random and ever-changing because nothing would be holding anything together. There'd be no one in control, nothing in control. Jesus created all of creation. And from the very first millisecond, in the very first atom, Jesus has been holding all things together and upholding all laws that he created. Man, as he does with all good things God has given him, well, we've declared ourselves God and perverted the good things, resulting in actions ranging from innocent ignorance to abject evil. Now, I truly believe there will be a day in the future where science will be legitimate. Literal science. I don't, however, believe it'll be in this current existence. I think as with all things, we may see an ebb and a flow, just as we're once again seeing in the political climate, just as we see in all things, to be honest. I believe that we're seeing good progress around the globe stopping the mutilation of children, although the United States is lagging behind. But overall, the trend of this world with regard to science is the same as the direction of this world in general. Down. Unquestionably down. But Jesus will be back. Some think very soon, others think sooner rather than later, and still others share my view. He's coming back eventually, and that's all I really need to worry about. When he does, all things will be made right once again, including science. I don't believe that we'll be a bunch of all-knowing, glorified humans. I think we'll still be able to hypothesize, experiment, analyze, rehypothesize, and around the horn we go. Johannes Kepler, who died only 3 days ago, this very month, 394 years ago, was a German astronomer, mathematician, astrologer, natural philosopher, and writer about music. Talk about feeling inadequate. He was also one of the key figures responsible for the scientific revolution of the 17th century. And I just make Excel sheets. Kepler believed that God was the creator of all and did so in an orderly fashion, which allowed science to exist because of the laws that were created and maintained by God. He wrote this, quote, "Those laws of nature are within the grasp of the human mind. God wanted us to recognize them by creating us after his own image so that we could share in his own thoughts." And this is likely where the famous phrase attributed to Kepler regarding the purpose of science came from, quote, "I am merely thinking God's thoughts after him." Now, how amazing will it be when those who are interested in science, Christians who are interested in science, now, after the end times, now with a full understanding that the true purpose of science is to strive to understand the how and the why with regard to God's creation, how cool will this be to start formulating new hypotheses, conduct new experiments, analyze true data, all the while working the scientific method in the presence of Jesus himself? What would it be like to come up with a finding, a preliminary conclusion, or just a new hypothesis, and have Jesus lean over your shoulder and say, "You're getting warmer"? One day, science will be true science. Until then, we must fight for the only truth we can ever know, that which is found in the Bible. And where capital S science contradicts the truth found in the capital S scriptures, we must continue to fight and force the woke, pseudo-religious capital S scare quotes science back into the darkness where it belongs. Well, Danny's book review, installment number 9, the second to the last installment in 2024. Although my plan is to do what I did at the end of 2023 or beginning of 2024. I can't really remember, and to be honest, a little bit too lazy right now to go back and check for sure, and to just take a segment to talk about how I finished up my goals for the previous year and what I'm looking forward to, this time in 2025. So really, the next book review will be the last focused book review, but there will be one more, sort of. And you really don't care that much, so I don't know why I'm wasting your time and mine with this level of detail. Kind of makes me think of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where a bunch of people keep shouting, "Get on with it!" So let's get on with it. This one's a bit different from the others, as I have 3 booklets that I'll be reviewing. Number of books I'm working through, none of those are done yet. 1 or 2 of them won't be finished until next year, I can say that for sure. But as I've mentioned before, I'm a fairly minimal supporter of Grace to You, which is Pastor John MacArthur's church and podcasts and media and whatever else, ministerial conglomerate. And he sends out participation awards from time to time, pretty much monthly, different things. To be honest, if I look at retail values, the free stuff I've been sent is probably worth more than what I'm donating. But hey, look, it's their call. Some of the stuff they send out are small booklets written about specific topics. For a couple of years, I've just kind of been stacking them up, saying, hey, I'll get to these eventually. Well, I've discovered, and you may not know this, but I've discovered that as with so many other things, eventually doesn't just happen by itself. So I decided that during my Bible study in the mornings, I'm going to try to work my way through these booklets, just maybe 1 or 2 per week if I can get that much time. And it just really depends on what time I get up and time I get down there to actually do the Bible study before I have to leave for work. Okay, that said, since last we met, I've worked through 3 out of the stack of booklets, and we'll briefly discuss them here. So first we have a 34-page booklet entitled Godly Citizens Under Godless Kings. This one came out, as you can likely imagine, not that long ago, shortly before the election. He starts, as I've been advocating, that Christians should not remove themselves from the political process. We shouldn't have done it before the election. We definitely should not do it now. Now, he's much nicer, much more biblical than I am on the topic. The gist is basically the same. We have a duty, and to not do that duty for some pious better than thou and double standard hypocritical, my words, not his, reason is really kind of wrong. The point of the booklet is that we live in a sinful world with sinful leaders and sinful governments, so how do we manage this? Now, he speaks about the biblical purpose of government, the current status of government, what the Bible says about how we're to act in our nation, regardless of what nation that might be, and he gives historical context of the governmental systems that were being lived in and through by those individuals who wrote about how we're to live in this world in the Bible. As with most, or nearly all, I would say probably all, but we'll say nearly all, material that MacArthur puts out, it's well thought out, packed with information, biblically rich, which means it's kind of hard to argue with. However, he does address the topic of righteous civil disobedience in both the Old and New Testament and our world today. In fact, he touches on his own church during the COVID era, which resides in California, where churches were told to shut down and shut up. They, like I think is justifiable for the first few weeks, maybe even for the first month or so, till we had a better idea of what we were dealing with, they shut down. But after that, they defied the governor's orders and opened their doors because the government, well, it's not allowed to mandate Christians violate what we're commanded in the Bible. So, this booklet is not one of those things that just tells us all to mindlessly obey our government overlords because Paul said this, right? There are times for us to respectfully disobey our government. Now, to be honest, I understand the context of the biblical authors. I understand what various trustworthy pastors have said on the topic, but I still have a problem with obeying orders from an evil government. I also wonder the opinion of a lot of these, hey, we're called to obey our government type guys with regard to the American Revolution. Where do they stand on what those guys did? So that said, this is a very solid biblical booklet on the topic. Thankfully, the election went the better of the 2 possible ways, and although I still maintain that we are a nation under judgment, we appear to be being granted a slight reprieve, at least in a large number of areas of society. The question is, what are we going to do with it, And are we actually serious about trying to push the nation back toward some sort of morality, any type of morality? Okay, second booklet, 17 pages, entitled Keeping a Pure Mind. And wow, I've got to believe that most people struggle with this daily, just multiple times. Some worse than others, but I mean, think about it. Anger, lust, impatience, worry, etc. It creeps into all of our minds, just all times when we choose to focus on other things rather than God. That's what we're talking about. That's purity of the mind. Now, he laid out a very solid argument about the dangers of a sinful thought life, and the way he covered it would make, I believe, anyone think about what they allow to slip in or slip by, what we dwell on, what we conjure up and fantasize about, or what we reminisce about. The bulk of the booklet is, in fact, dedicated to the sinfulness of the thought life and the very sneaky, almost imperceptible ways it can creep in, fester, and seriously affect your entire life if you allow it. The last few pages give some kind of rapid-fire practical applications, some steps to take, specific things to look out for. The booklet ends with the question, how's your thought life? And I'd say for most of us, but I'll speak for myself, it's not great. I mean, the good thing is that I have plenty of room for improvement. The bad thing is that I have plenty of room for improvement. And improvement isn't necessarily easy. Okay, the last booklet is 18 pages, entitled The Disastrous Sin of Lying. Okay, let me go off on a rabbit trail here. So, as I've been slowly working through the Bible, I've had a nagging question about sin, just in general. And not all sin. In fact, not even most sin. But my question with regard to some categories of some sin is, how does intent play into this? And I know the sayings about, and the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and things like that. None of those are biblical sayings. They're very pithy sayings, but they're not biblical sayings. So I have a question about intent. So let me briefly explain. I'm not trying to justify sin. On the contrary, I think that most Christians have been conditioned to self-flagellate over categories of sin rather than look at our thoughts and actions for what they really are. For instance, we all agree that we are not to murder, but that commandment isn't as black and white as it appears, as we're told to take the life of those who commit certain crimes. Now, I know that we don't call that murder, but it is. We just use a different word for it. The difference between taking someone's life with no reason and taking it for the purpose of justice is the intent behind why we're taking the person's life. Rahab the prostitute lied to the guards about the spies back in the Old Testament. We're never told that that was wrong of her necessarily. That intent was similar to what people did with the Underground Railroad or during Nazi occupation when the Nazis were hunting down the remaining Jews. To lie about something to spare someone's feelings or to defer the conversation that will absolutely happen until a time or environment more suited to a hard discussion doesn't have a nefarious component. The intent is good. So is the lie a sin? I'd guess that all of you would automatically reflexively say yes, but I don't know that it's as cut and dry as that. That said, I don't believe that we can look at all sin that way. A man lusting after a woman, or so-called harmlessly viewing inappropriate online media, is never not a sin. The intent is always wrong, no matter how someone may try to justify it. I can't think of a time when the intent of theft is pure, but we're told to obey our parents. What if your parents are adamant about something, but you know that doing or allowing that thing would be physically or economically, spiritually harmful, so you defy their express demand to do the better thing to protect them from themselves? Is that sin? I'd have a hard time calling it sin based on the intent. Okay, I know that this isn't a popular line of thought, and as with so many things, I'll admit that my thought process is likely wrong, but it's something I'm noodling through in my head. As for this booklet, my hope was that it would maybe broach that topic. It did not. In fact, as I was reading through the various examples, my mind kept coming back to, well, sure, the intent is obvious here. So MacArthur goes through a number of reasons why people lie and discusses the importance for parents to teach their children that lying is never okay. Again, gotta look at intent. Overall, I can't argue with anything he said in the booklet. He just didn't really touch on the idea of intent. So for the booklet that he wrote, I can't find fault with what he said. Okay, so overall, as with all of MacArthur's stuff, if you find him to be a trustworthy shepherd, a solid biblical teacher or preacher, you'll definitely agree that these booklets are well done and have the potential to be valuable resources. If you don't like MacArthur, it's your call, right? I still think you're hard-pressed to find fault with these booklets, but to each his own. Now, personally, I've quite enjoyed the fast-paced, no-nonsense format that can be read in generally 20 to 30 minutes total. And although he packs a lot in these small booklets, he does so in a very readable, personable way. He's not going to be coming at you like a graduate-level seminary professor. This is practical and biblical information for the real world of the Christian. The question, of course, is, would I recommend these? And yeah, I'd absolutely recommend these. You can go on gty.org and search for booklets, find a large number of these on a large number of topics. They're thought-provoking, even in their brevity, and are applicable regardless of if you're struggling personally with a specific topic, or if you're just reading out of curiosity, trying to deepen your knowledge and wisdom on something. Okay, so that should do it for Danny's book review, installment number 9. All 3 of these booklets are on the Grace to You store website, gty.org. They're $2 each, and the link for the booklets I mentioned will be in the episode notes. So with that, as always, go read something. And with that, sadly, we've reached the end of yet another episode of the Logical Christian Podcast. I feel we've bonded as we've laughed and cried and twisted our faces in incredulity. If you've enjoyed or found value in what you've heard, go on and do all the podcast things. And don't forget to check the show notes for links and contact info. Lawrence J. Peters said, "Against logic there is no armor like ignorance." Jesus told us that if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So stay in the word, stay logical, stay faithful, and until next time, God bless.